Hi, and welcome back to Crochet Every Day with Judy. Today we're reading again from the Arabian Nights, the history of the young king of the Black Isles. My father, named Mahmud, was king of this country. This is the kingdom of the Black Isles, which takes its name from the 4 small neighboring mountains. For those mountains were formerly isles. The capital was on the spot now occupied by the lake you have seen. The king, my father, died when he was 70 years of age. I had no sooner succeeded him than I married my cousin. At first nothing could surpass the harmony and pleasure of our union. This lasted 5 years, at the end of which time I perceived she ceased to delight in my attentions. One day after dinner, while she was at the bath, I lay down upon a sofa. 2 of her ladies came and sat down, one at my head and the other at my feet, with fans in their hands to moderate the heat and to prevent the flies from disturbing me. They thought I was asleep and spoke in whispers, but as I only closed my eyes, I heard all their conversation. One of them said to the other, "Is not the queen wrong not to love so amiable a prince?" "Certainly," replied the other. "I do not understand the reason, neither can I perceive why she goes out every night and leaves him alone. Is it possible that he does not perceive it?" "Alas," said the first, "how should he? She mixes every evening in his liquor the juice of a certain herb, which makes him sleep so sound all night that she has time to go where she pleases. And as day begins to appear, she comes and lies down by him again, and wakes him by the smell of something she puts under his nostrils." You may guess, my lord, how much I was surprised at this conversation. I had, however, self-control enough to pretend to awake without having heard a word. The queen returned from the bath. We supped together, and she presented me with a cup full of such water as I was accustomed to drink. But instead of putting it to my mouth, I went to a window that was open and threw out the water so quickly that she did not perceive it, and returned. Soon after, believing that I was asleep, she said loud enough for me to hear her distinctly, "Sleep on, and may you never wake again." So saying, she dressed herself and went out of the chamber. No sooner was she gone than I dressed myself in haste, took my scimitar, and followed her so quickly that I soon heard the sound of her feet before me, and then walked softly after her for fear of being heard. She passed through several gates which opened upon her pronouncing some magical words, and the last she opened was that of the garden which she entered. I stopped at this gate that she might not perceive me as she passed along a parterre. Then, looking after her as far as the darkness of the night permitted, I saw her enter a little wood. I went thither by another way, and concealing myself, saw her walking there with a man. I did not fail to lend the most attentive ear to their discourse, and heard her offer to fly to another land with the fellow. As the queen finished speaking, she and her lover turned and passed before me. I had already drawn my scimitar, and her lover being next me, I struck him to the ground. I concluded I had killed him, and therefore retired speedily without making myself known to the queen. The wound I had given her lover was mortal, but by her enchantments she preserved him in an existence in which he could not be said to be either dead or alive. As I crossed the garden to return to the palace, I heard the queen loudly lamenting, and judging by her cries how much she was grieved, I was pleased that I had spared her life. As soon as I had reached my apartment, I went to bed, and being satisfied with having punished the villain who had injured me, fell asleep. And when I awoke next morning, found the queen clad in mourning, her hair disheveled. "I come to beg your majesty not to be surprised to see me in this condition," she said. "My heavy affliction is occasioned by intelligence of 3 distressing events: the death of the queen, my dear mother, that of the king, my father, killed in battle, and of one of my brothers who has fallen down a precipice." "Madam," said I, "so far from blaming, I assure you I heartily commiserate your sorrow. I merely therefore expressed the hope that time and reflection would moderate her grief." She begged permission to erect a burying place for herself within the bounds of the palace, where she would continue, she told me, to the end of her days. I consented, and she built a stately edifice and called it the Palace of Tears. When it was finished, she caused her lover to be conveyed thither. She had hitherto prevented his dying by potions which she had administered to him, and she continued to convey them to him herself every day after he came to the Palace of Tears. Yet with all her enchantments, she could not cure him. He was not only unable to walk or support himself, but had also lost the use of his speech and exhibited no sign of life except in his looks. One day, my curiosity inducing me to go to the Palace of Tears, I heard her thus address her lover: "I am afflicted to the highest degree to behold you in this condition. Dear soul, I am continually speaking to you, and you do not answer me. How long will you remain silent? O tomb, hast thou destroyed that excess of affection which he bare me? Hast thou closed those eyes that evinced so much love and were all my delight?" I must confess, my lord, I was enraged at these expressions, and in my turn I cried, "O tomb, why dost not thou swallow up that monster so revolting to human nature?" I had scarcely uttered these words when the queen rose up like a fury. Miscreant, said she, thou art the cause of my grief. By virtue of my enchantments, I command thee to become half marble and half man. Immediately, my lord, I became what you see, a dead man among the living, and a living man among the dead. After this cruel sorceress, unworthy of the name of queen, had metamorphosed me thus, and brought me into this hall, by another enchantment she destroyed my capital, which was very flourishing and populous. She annihilated the houses, the public places and markets, and reduced the sight of the whole to the lake and desert plain you have seen. The fishes of 4 colors in the lake are the 4 kinds of inhabitants of different religions which the city contained. The white are the Mussulmans, the red the Persians who worship fire, the blue the Christians, and the yellow the Jews. The 4 little hills were the 4 islands that gave name to this kingdom. But this is not all. She comes every day and gives me over my naked shoulders 100 lashes with a whip until I am covered with blood. When she has finished this part of my punishment, she throws over me a coarse stuff of goat's hair, and over that this robe of brocade to mock me. The prince ended his story, and for a long time there was silence. Then the sultan, filled with anger, bade the young man tell him where the sorceress might be found, that he might slay her. "Where is this palace of tears?" he demanded. "It is on the side of the castle in which the gate is placed," answered the prince. "Every day at sunrise the queen goes thither." "Then thither will I go and take vengeance upon the woman," cried the sultan. They talked far into the night, and at dawn the sultan arose and proceeded to the palace of tears. He found it lighted with an infinite number of wax torches, and perfumed by a delicious scent issuing from several censers of fine gold. As soon as he saw the senseless form of the lover on the couch, he drew his scimitar, destroyed the little remains of life left, and dragging the body into the outer court, threw it into an unused well. After this, he went and lay down on the couch, placed his scimitar under the covering, and waited to complete his design. The queen arrived shortly after in the chamber of her husband, the king of the Black Isles. In spite of his entreaties, she stripped him and gave him 100 stripes. Then she put on again his covering of goat's hair and his robe of brocade. She next went to the palace of tears, and on entering began to renew her lamentations. "Alas," cried she, addressing herself to the sultan, whom she supposed to be her lover, "wilt thou, light of my life, always preserve this silence?" The sultan, lowering his voice as if in great weakness, spoke a few words. Overjoyed, the sorceress gave a violent scream. "My dear lord," she exclaimed, "is it really you who speak to me?" "Cruel woman," said the sultan, "art thou worthy of an answer?" "Ah, do not reproach me," begged the queen. The sultan continued in a low voice, "The cries, the groans, and tears of your husband, whom you every day beat with such cruelty, prevent my rest. Make haste to set him at liberty, that I be no longer disturbed by his lamentations." The enchantress went immediately out of the palace of tears to fulfill these commands, and by the exercise of her spells soon restored to the young king his natural shape, bidding him, however, on pain of death, to be gone from her presence instantly. The young king, yielding to necessity, retired to a remote place, where he patiently awaited the event of the design which the sultan had so happily begun. Meanwhile, the enchantress returned to the palace of tears, and supposing that she still spoke to her lover, assured him his behest had been obeyed. The sultan, still disguising his voice, said, "What you have now done is by no means sufficient for my cure. Bethink thee of the town, the islands, and the inhabitants destroyed by thy fatal enchantments. The fish every night at midnight raise their heads out of the lake and cry for vengeance against thee and me. This is the true cause of the delay of my cure. Go speedily, restore things to their former state, and at thy return I will give thee my hand, and thou shalt help me to arise." The enchantress, inspired with hope, lost no time, but betook herself in all haste to the brink of the lake, where she took a little water in her hand, and sprinkling it, pronounced some word over the fish, whereupon the city was immediately restored. The fish became men, women, and children, Mohammedans, Christians, Persians, or Jews, freemen or slaves as they were before, every one having recovered his natural form. The houses and shops were immediately filled with their inhabitants, who found all things as they were before the enchantment. The Sultan's officers and attendants, who found themselves encamped in the largest square, were astonished to see themselves in an instant in the middle of a large, handsome, well-peopled city. To return to the enchantress. As soon as she had effected this wonderful change, she returned with all expedition to the Palace of Tears, that she might receive her reward. "Come near," said the Sultan. She did so. "You are not near enough." "Nearer." She obeyed. Excuse me. He then rose up, and seizing her by the arm so suddenly that she had not time to discover him, he, with a blow of its scimitar, cut her in two, so that one half fell one way and the other another. This done, he left the body on the spot, and going out of the Palace of Tears, went to seek the young king of the Black Isles. "Prince," said he, embracing him, "rejoice. You have now nothing to fear. Your cruel enemy is dead. You may henceforth dwell peaceably in your capital, unless you will accompany me to mine, which is not above 4 or 5 hours' journey distant." Excuse me. "Potent monarch," replied the prince, "I do indeed believe that you came hither from your capital in the time you mention, because mine was enchanted. But since the enchantment is taken off, things are changed. It will take you no less than a year to return. However, this shall not prevent my following you, were it to the utmost corners of the earth." The Sultan was extremely surprised to understand that he was so far from his dominions, and could not imagine how it could be. "But," he said, "it is no matter. The trouble of returning to my own country is recompensed by acquiring you for a son. For since you will do me the honor to accompany me, I will make you my heir and successor." At length the Sultan and the young prince began their journey with 100 camels, laden with inestimable riches from the treasury of the young king, followed by 50 handsome men on horseback, perfectly well mounted and dressed. The inhabitants came out in great crowds, received him with joy, and made public rejoicings for several days. The day after his arrival, the Sultan gave all his courtiers a complete account of the circumstances which had detained him so long. He informed them that he had adopted the king of the 4 Black Isles, who was willing to leave a great kingdom to accompany and live with him, and in reward for their loyalty, he made each of them presents according to their rank. As for the fisherman, the Sultan gave him a plentiful fortune, which made him and his family happy the rest of his days. We'll stop there and start tomorrow with the magic carpet. Bye-bye.